When you hear the word implosion, your mind likely goes to the crushing depths of the ocean, submarines succumbing to unimaginable pressures, perhaps even the recent and tragic fate of the OceanGate's Titan. But what if I were to tell you those same catastrophic forces could occur not miles beneath the ocean, but right here on land? Terrifyingly intimate accounts of everyday operations becoming inescapable nightmares, most of which occurred in the 1980s, revealing these stark realities of working with pressure differential technologies, highlighting a crucial turning point in workplace safety. In today's video, we will be examining two of the most unsettling incidents from that era. So sit back and relax as we yet again step out into the abyss. So this first one takes us back to September of 1986. A few employees for General Electric's aviation division are in the process of conducting altitude testing on a jet engine nose cone. Now essentially the way this worked was, they would place the nose cone into a vacuum chamber similar to the one shown on screen here. The air is then continuously sucked out until they achieve an atmospheric pressure near 0.0 psi inside of the chamber. After a certain amount of time has passed, air is allowed back in. The chamber is then opened, and the cone is removed for inspection. Little did they know, their next test would result in what would arguably become one of the most brutal workplace incidents of all time. By all accounts, the test started off completely normal. Before long, they had achieved near absolute vacuum, or 0 psi, within the chamber. One of those men walked over to the porthole in order to observe the cone during the test. And he didn't know it yet, but he had just walked right into an extremely dangerous situation. To put this into perspective, at sea level, our bodies are under a constant pressure of around 14.7 pounds per square inch. Inside of that chamber, the pressure is near zero. And although this may seem like a very minute difference, you gotta remember that is pounds per square inch, meaning the porthole itself, with a diameter of 12 inches, have been subjected to inward forces of approximately 1,600 pounds repetitively for weeks on end. Imagine the biggest polar bear you have ever seen. Now imagine you've been handed a glass circle roughly 12 inches in diameter, and your job is to fight that bear off multiple times a day, day after day, week after week. That is a shitload of wear and tear. In essence, the porthole had become weakened over time. Regardless, as he stepped up to the porthole, he couldn't quite see inside due to the glare of the many overhead lights within the facility. So he placed his hand up against the glass, and as he moved his head ever so slightly forward, all of a sudden, in less than a second, the glass had failed. This tremendous change in pressure caused the individual to be pulled directly into the opening, with an immediate and devastating effect. It didn't crack or shatter, rather, it violently and explosively ruptured inward, collapsing into the chamber with a sound that would have been instantly deafening to anyone nearby. This was a complete unleashing of atmospheric fury, a sudden and catastrophic implosion. The employee, caught directly in the path of this incredible force, was instantly drawn into the opening with an overwhelming power. Their hand, head, and arm, being the leading points of impact, were instantly consumed by the chamber. The stainless steel rim of this 12-inch opening quickly became an insurpassable obstacle for the rest of the body. The relentless change in pressure continued to push, driving the man's torso and shoulders against the narrow and unforgiving edges of the opening. This wasn't a squeeze, but an instantaneous and devastating compression. His body had been forced to conform to a space it was never meant to occupy. His head, now within the vacuum, experienced an immediate and profound shift in pressure. And you gotta remember, this all happened within the span of about 2 seconds. Consciousness would have ceased almost immediately. It was swift, it was brutal, and tragically fatal. And although his co-workers immediately jumped into action to try and save him, there was just simply nothing they could do. This is OSHA report number 0317000, and the incident occurred on September 11th of 1986. General Electric, the company at fault, was cited under Section 5 of the General Duty Clause at the time. This basically states that they are responsible for providing each and every one of their employees with a workplace free from hazards that lead to serious injury and or death. Total fines incurred by General Electric at the time were $640. In today's money, that's roughly $1,900. And unfortunately, as devastating as this event was, I'd like to be able to tell you that it was an isolated occurrence. But 1986 would prove to be what seemed like a reckoning for the way that we approach workplace safety, specifically when dealing with vacuum systems. This incident, in combination with the one you're about to hear, would go on to highlight the need for immediate change. becoming a driving force in the evolution of industrial safety standards, as well as a stark reminder of the immense forces at play when dealing with this type of equipment. So this next one takes us to November of 1986, precisely 2 months after the General Electric incident we just discussed. A maintenance tech working for Avtex Fibers out of Front Royal, Virginia, had been tasked with troubleshooting a leak in an acid renewal system. And while this process is much more complicated than what I am about to tell you, what you need to know is this: the system operates under a vacuum. In other words, the leak wasn't forcing any liquids or gases out, rather, it was taking on air, hindering all the processes ahead of the evaporator. And at this point, they were well aware they had a leak. They just didn't know exactly where it was. So the maintenance tech went off, located it, and came back to report his findings. There was a crack in the evaporator roughly 2 inches long and 1/8 of an inch wide. So management discusses their options, and they came to the conclusion that they couldn't justify shutting the entire system down for what seemed like such a minor issue. To avoid the cost of shutdown times, the decision was made to make the repair while the system was still online. They would do this by cold welding a small strip of metal over the hole using an epoxy known as JB weld. This would turn out to be a critical mistake with extremely horrifying and fatal consequences. What they didn't know is that what seemed like a hairline fracture on the surface was actually a giant fissure roughly 5 feet long. With that in mind, the technician began lathering up that strip of metal with the epoxy. But as he placed it over the hole, he could still hear the leak. So he went to go apply some more pressure. But the very second he did, an entire section of the evaporator gave way, pulling the man inside. Without warning, without a single second to perceive, that barrier was completely gone. This sudden change in pressure, rushing inward, created an inescapable pull. The maintenance tech, caught directly in its path, was drawn into the rapidly collapsing space. No time to brace, no time to react. What's more is, the corrosive atmosphere inside created an extremely hazardous environment, the acidic contents of which had been violently displaced. The impact, so devastating, so forceful, consciousness would have been lost immediately. He had likely passed away within just a few seconds. Emergency services would spend the next few hours meticulously cutting apart the evaporator, trying to expand that hole in order to get him out. Avtex Fibers, the company at fault, was given a total of $900 in fines, or roughly $2,600 in today's money. So at this point, I'm sure many of you are saying, $640 doesn't seem like a lot of money after willfully placing a man into harm's way. And to clarify, these aren't the amounts they were made to pay out in wrongful death lawsuits. These are simply the amounts made to pay out to OSHA for not adhering to the safety standards implemented at the time. More so, back then, workplace safety was sort of in its Wild West phase. While they knew there was much work to be done, there were many incidents they just simply didn't come by all that often. But when they did, as you just found out, the result was more than devastating. And so in many of these cases, companies that were deemed at fault were hit with blanket clauses that covered a wide variety of incidents. Section 5 of the General Duty Clause is what allowed OSHA to give General Electric and Avtex Fibers those fines, as minute as they may seem. But alas, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we have made it to the end of this video. If you feel like you learned something new here, or you simply enjoy this type of content, consider subbing, dropping your thoughts in the comments, or possibly leaving a like, as it greatly helps this channel find its way to the correct audience. With that in mind, we sincerely hope you have an amazing, whatever it is, wherever you may be. See you on the next one. Peace out.